Hi there, my name is Jim Throgmorton. I currently represent District C on Iowa City City Council, and I'm a candidate for an at-large position in this fall's election, and I ask for your support. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself, because not all of you know. I'm going to work backwards. So I've lived in Iowa City for 29 years, and I currently live in the North Side neighborhood with my wife, Barbara, daughter, Zoe, and not far from my adult sons, Paul and Patrick, and Paul's wife, Min. I taught urban and regional planning at the University of Iowa for 24 years until I retired in 2010. Before that, while I was here, while I've been on the City Council, I've also served on several boards and commissions, including the City of Literature, the MPO board of the Johnson County Planning Organization. I'm active in several other organizations, including the Coalition for Racial Justice, the Center for Worker Justice, the Affordable Homes Coalition, and the Iowa City Climate Advocates. But I previously lived in the Twain and Longfellow neighborhoods back in my earlier days in town. And before that, I lived in Chicago, where I worked for a National Energy Research Laboratory. Before that, I was in Los Angeles, where I got a doctorate. I also worked for 2 different consulting firms. Before that, I lived in Kansas City, Missouri, where I worked for a consulting firm. Before that, I worked for a regional air pollution control agency in Louisville, Kentucky. And before that, I was a tank company commander in a tank battalion over in Europe. That is right, I'm a vet. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. My father was a building contractor. So there's a lot going on there, and I probably overlooked a couple things, but the bottom line is I know the city and I know its people, but I also see the city through the eyes of somebody who's traveled extensively throughout the United States and Europe, who has studied city development for well over 25 years, and who has lived in a variety of cities. I've already named some here in the US, but I've also lived in Berlin, Germany, in southern France, and have visited a whole bunch of cities over in Europe. So, many people, including several council candidates, say that things are going great in Iowa City, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In other words, we should just stay the course, keep moving forward. Well, I completely agree that Iowa City is a great place. I love the city, otherwise I wouldn't be here. I love the city. I invest enormous amounts of time, energy, and intellectual and capacity toward improving it. But one thing I observe when I get out of City Hall and talk to regular people is that for far too many of us, Iowa City, in fact, is broken. It's not working well for far too many of us. When I talk to my friends who are disabled in a variety of ways, they tell me about cuts in seats, funding to seats, for example. When I talk to friends who are involved in, who are lower income, they tell me about the difficulty of finding homes that they can afford to live in. When I talk to African American friends, I hear about their fear of being monitored, controlled, and worse with regard to just being black. When I talk to friends who are Latino or Hispanic, I hear about anxiety having to do with being displaced from their homes or being suddenly investigated by some particular governmental agency. So things are not as they appear to be. You've got to get out of City Hall, you've got to get out of the office and get out where the people are to find out how things really are working in this town. So I want to build on what's already great about Iowa City and lead it toward becoming a just city, a city that is good on the ground for all its residents, both now and in the future. And I believe the quality of our lives together as a community completely depend upon that. So I have 6 steps that I have in mind, and I'll mention them to you. The first is City Council practices need to be much more open and responsive to all the city's residents. We've got to get out of City Hall. I think the mayor could regularly take scheduled walks through the city's various neighborhoods, for example, and we need to hold more listening posts, which we're doing now, but that's a result of something I advocated almost a year ago. We need to do more of them in places where regular people feel most comfortable, not in City Hall, in other words. We also need to make our processes involving tax increment financing much more fair and trustworthy. This is not a critique of city staff. They do a very rigorous job. It is more of a political critique having to do with the fact that so many people feel that TIF and related financial incentives are being directed toward a few well-connected developers and leaving the rest of us to kind of make do as we can. I think also, as a third step, we need to invest in ways that directly benefit, if you will, regular working people. I know everybody works, but I mean people who are basically in the lower half of the income bracket. And the key thing there is to do a much better job of increasing the supply of housing that people can afford to live in. We've done a few good things within the past year, especially with regard to riverfront crossings, that district. But there's so much more we can do, and I have particular ideas about that. The fourth thing is we need to make even better strides toward reducing race-related disparities in income, employment, access to jobs, and so on, and make sure that we deal with racial inequities as best we can. We've made good progress over the past 3 years, and I guarantee you I've invested an enormous amount of time and energy into this, taking advantage of friends, contacts who are affiliated with the Coalition for Racial Justice, and especially the Black Voices Project. But there's much, much more that we can do. Fifth, I think we need to invest in ways that are really good for our older core neighborhoods. Instead of spending very expensive money out on the periphery and expanding on the periphery, we need to invest in streets, streetscapes, sidewalks, and provide funds for people to renovate their older homes and so on. And you know, I don't want to oversimplify, but you get the point. And the last, we need to make sure that we facilitate a money-saving, job-creating transition away from fossil fuel-based or carbon-based fossil fuels and toward other sources of energy. So in the end, I want to help lead Iowa City toward becoming a just city, a city that's good on the ground for all its residents, both now and in the future. And I would appreciate your support in the fall. Thank you.